Good afternoon, everybody. I'll just wait till everyone's joined the virtual room before I formally commence proceedings today. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Sharon tōku ingoa, nau mai, haere mai. Thank you everybody for joining us and attending today's event. I'd like to start with a very warm welcome to our guests of honour today, the Honourable Phil Twyford, Spokesperson for Economic Development at the Labour Party, the Honourable Todd McClay, Spokesperson for Economic Development for the National Party, and Marama Davidson, co-leader of the Green Party. Kia ora and welcome to all of you. Thank you for your time today. We are also delighted to have Holly Bennett, founder of HSBC Government Relations, with us as our moderator today. Always a pleasure to have you with us, Holly. Thank you so much for your time. Just quickly, the housekeeping. Today's event is on the record and we do welcome the media that are here with us. We also encourage all of your questions to our panel today, and you can submit these through the Q&A function, which Holly will pick up in the second part of today's discussion. So we're keen to get started and to hear from our panelists today. So I'll hand over to Holly to kick us off. Thanks, Holly.
Thank you, Sharon. Kia ora koutou, nau mai, haere mai. Welcome to the Trans-Tasman Business Circle election panel on economic development. Ko Holly aho, my name's Holly, as Sharon mentioned, and I am going to be your moderator for this session. We're joined by three political leaders today, all of whom are current members of Parliament and all senior members of our respected parties. So thank you so much for joining us. Before getting into the economic development session, I want to set out how the session's going to run. For the first 30 minutes, I will be going through three core issues with our panelists, which are economic development policy, job creation, and major events. And then I will turn to our moderated Q&A, which is where I put your guys' questions directly to our panel. As with all political panel discussions, I respect our politicians' right to kōrero as much as they need to answer the questions. However, fair warning, if any jump on a soapbox, I will jump in to keep our discussion moving. So let's kick on. Economic development in Aotearoa is focused on improving the well-being of New Zealanders by supporting our economy to become more productive, resilient and sustainable. Last week, we got confirmation that our economy shrank by 12.2% in the June quarter, which is the largest quarterly fall on record. Panel, your parties have all published economic platforms, so should you be on government benches after October 17, can you please outline for us your key priorities for economic development? I'll hand this over to our current Minister of Economic Development first, Phil Twyford, then Todd McClay, and then over to Marama. So take it away, Phil.
Ngā mihi nui kia koutou, and thank you, Holly, and greetings to my parliamentary colleagues, Marama and Todd, and thanks as always to the Trans-Tasman Business Circle for so ably and graciously hosting these kinds of dialogues on policy and politics. It's a truism to say that COVID-19 has turned our world upside down, and it's no more true than in the economic sphere. And as with almost everything now, the debates that we're having about the future of our country are really framed by COVID-19. And our economic development policy, Labour's economic development policy certainly is. We've taken the view that a strong health response is the best economic response that we can take. And I think that New Zealand's performance in keeping the virus at bay and cushioning the economic shock for our businesses and for our families, compared to the experience in all of the countries overseas that we normally compare ourselves to, I think that comparison speaks for itself. It's our conviction now that we have to bring the same sense of purpose and drive that we've applied to dealing with COVID-19 over the last half year or so to the economic recovery. And so what I wanted to do is really just headline the key elements of our economic plan for the post-COVID recovery. The first is about investing in our people, and people will know, everyone will be aware that the wage subsidy scheme has supported 1.7 million jobs. If you look at the OECD comparisons, our wage subsidy scheme has reached out to more businesses per head of population than any of the other comparable schemes around the Western world. We've had a number of sectoral programs in aviation and tourism and others to support the hardest hit sectors. We've invested in trade training and apprenticeships and a raft of other things designed to help businesses and people get through the economic crisis. The second point is about jobs, really. Jobs, and more jobs. And again, the wage subsidy scheme is important, but we've unleashed a massive program of infrastructure building designed to create thousands of new jobs and generate demand in the economy. We're investing in schools and hospitals, in our natural environment. We're building 8,000 more public houses. All of those things are designed to stimulate the economy and boost jobs. We have to prepare for our future, and as we build, we have to build back better. That's why we've set a goal of 100% renewable energy for New Zealand. It's why our Jobs for Nature program is generating 1,000 jobs in the process, and our Warmer Kiwi Homes scheme, on top of the 20,000 homes already retrofitted, will create hundreds of jobs as we retrofit our homes. Fourth, supporting entrepreneurs and small businesses. It's been a huge feature of the response to COVID. We've cranked up our regional business partners scheme, which is administered by chambers of commerce and economic development agencies around New Zealand. The take-up's been massive as small businesses look to pivot in the time of COVID to new business strategies. First survival, and then recovery and regrowth. Finally, we have to, the fifth point in our plan really is about positioning New Zealand globally. As a trading nation, the way that we grow our way out of this is by developing the goods and services that the world wants to buy and penetrating global markets more effectively. Our recent budget put $54 million a year into New Zealand trade and enterprise to double the number of high intensity firms from 700 to 1,400 who get the services of NZTE to help them break into global markets. We're working on trade agreements. We've adopted a plan for an additional $44 billion in export earnings over the next decade through our sustainable primary sector. So Holly, that's our 5-point plan that will take us through the recovery into a better future. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Now I'll pass over to Todd.
Holly, thanks very much, and ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Can I start by thanking the Trans-Tasman Business Circle for pulling this together? I know there was a little bit of juggling. We thought we were doing it earlier, but unfortunately for businesses and hard-working taxpayers in Auckland, we had to go into another lockdown, and of course all the dates were pushed out, including the election. Can I recognise my parliamentary colleagues, Phil and Marama, and wish them well, but not too much well, over the coming 20-something days. When we talk about the challenges ahead for the New Zealand economy and how we need to focus on growing it through enabling a business environment where businesses can get on and create jobs, we need to be very careful that we don't blame everything that's not working well in New Zealand on COVID-19. Because sadly, if we go back before the initial lockdown, when Phil's government chose to lock almost all of the economy down, close it down, actually businesses in New Zealand were already struggling. We saw that the cost upon businesses were going up, the regulatory burden was excessive, the policies that were coming from the government that actually don't enable business to invest and do the things Phil says he hopes to achieve over the next 3 years with his 5-point plan were already having an effect. And we know this because business confidence before COVID was some of the worst we've seen since the GFC. What we need to do is create in New Zealand an environment where businesses can thrive and can get ahead. And there's a number of things we need to do so very, very quickly before we even consider the challenges that COVID has presented, but of course some of the opportunities that may well be there. As I'm out and about talking, in fact, when I was a business owner myself, regulation and bad regulation and too much regulation is often what gets in the way of good business practice, and it ends up penalising those who are good business people that want to grow their businesses and want to export, who want to help grow the economy by creating better and higher paying jobs. Actually, it holds them back. Whereas often those who are not good at their business practice are left alone because the cost is not placed upon them. Well, National has a very clear plan to reduce regulatory burden upon businesses, particularly small businesses, and in this way enable them to do so very much more in the economy. We've announced that we want to, in our first 6 months, get rid of 100 regulations and then have a 2-for-1 offer. For every new regulation that the government wants to put in place, 2 must be taken away. Not just because that sounds like a slogan or you put it at the head of a 5-point plan, because actually it sends a signal across government that we want a change of culture, that more rules won't necessarily solve a problem. What's needed is better rules, and to work with the business community so that they can get on and do the stuff that we need them to. We've also said that we want to grow and stimulate the economy through the use of the tax system. We've announced that businesses, particularly small businesses, will get tax relief when it comes to investment. They can depreciate plant and material in a one-off each year up to $150,000 per item, and we've just announced further areas in that. We want to stimulate the economy and create jobs through supporting business to be able to do the things we need them to, which is invest and grow and be more productive. We've also said that we believe that the burden that the RMA has placed upon all New Zealanders is too much. And so we will repeal it and replace it with 2 pieces of legislation that are fit for purpose. And if you ever wondered whether or not the RMA was a problem, you've only got to look at the current government had to exempt themselves from the RMA when it comes to many of their shovel-ready projects, because even they couldn't get on and build the things that we need to in New Zealand. If the government can't work with the RMA, what hope has a small business person or a householder that wants to get ahead? The final part of this is that we need to have a secure border. Kiwi businesses need to know that the government is taking their responsibility at the border seriously, so that we don't keep yo-yoing in and out of lockdowns and further restrictions. Because every time the government has to put a restriction or chooses to place a restriction upon New Zealand and businesses, people lose jobs, debt goes up, and uncertainty grows. We need to create an environment where there is one agency dealing with the border, and when the government says it's going to do something, it actually happens. We announced our border policy yesterday, which helps us move away from talking about what's essential, because I would tell you that in my view, what's essential is keeping your business or having a job or being able to pay your rent or your mortgage, and we should move towards what is safe. Phil, in the lockdown, when you and I were in the pandemic committee and you said that your government chose to close the economy down, when we were calling for greater flexibility, if a dairy can open safely, why not the butcher or the greengrocer? Actually, if it could have been done safe, it should have been considered, because that saves businesses and it saves jobs. So we think there is the opportunity to start a responsible conversation with all New Zealanders about a secure border that allows us to find ways to open up more, and that policy was set out yesterday. The final thing I would say here is, in creating that environment where business can flourish in New Zealand, when it comes to the burden that's been placed upon them because of COVID-19, now is not the time to be increasing that burden. We should be looking for things that is going to make it easier for people to trade their way out of the debt that's been imposed upon them, and to create the jobs that those 100,000 New Zealanders that Treasury predict will lose work over the next 2 years so desperately need. It's not the time for more burden, more public holidays, more sick leave. It's a time to show business that we understand the burdens that they face, and that they are an important part, an integral part of the next few years of rebuilding our economy and stimulating growth, so that New Zealand starts heading in the right direction. Thank you.
Kia ora, Todd. And now, last but certainly not least, over to Marama, your economic development policy platform.
Ngā mihi nui kia koe holi kia koutou Trans-Tasman Business Circle. I'm pretty chuffed to be here engaging in this absolutely vital and important conversation. I do wish my colleagues Todd and Phil well. Phil probably doesn't need as much wishing, and Todd, I wish you enlightenment also. Look, I acknowledge the smart thinking and business leadership that I know is already happening, that faces the challenges pertinent to economic planning face on. And I've been thinking about this, that for quite some time, there has already been the imagining, the strategizing, the innovating in the business and investment world that knows we will have to deal with the reality of the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and deepening poverty and inequality. And this thought leadership is what will be needed to deal with recovery through a global pandemic. But there is one thing I agree with Todd on, which probably a couple more things, which is that there were challenges already before COVID-19, already before a global pandemic. The global pandemic has simply highlighted and exacerbated those challenges and has made it more difficult for some parts and some sectors of our society and of our business and trading communities as well. That COVID-19 has certainly forced our hands in order to keep our people safe in a lot of ways. So the strongest economic plan that we can have then is one that provides some clarity and certainty and support for a transition to a zero carbon economy that revitalizes our natural systems that we know our economy relies on and always has. I appreciate the leadership in business and investment thinking that already knows that business as usual means a highly polluting and ecologically unsustainable economy on a pathway that will lock in further catastrophic climate change, further environmental degradation, and worsening inequality. And that will be no good for anybody, including our economy. The next few years then are vital to transforming, to change the quality of our economic growth and reduce its impact on climate, environment, and communities. So we acknowledge, the Greens, that we need an overall coordinated approach that can see into the corners of what we are all doing together, that there needs to be policy clarity in essential regulation and support from local and central governments, so that we've got the bravery to diversify our investments into truly productive and higher value outputs. You know, and because we need business and people need the support to be able to transition, and this government this term has already started doing that, and the Greens have further proposals so that we can go faster and in a way that is sustainable into that transition to a zero carbon economy. There's also a lot we need to do, and those are also economic opportunities. For example, that is why the Greens have announced a Farming for the Future plan to support farmers to move towards more sustainable farming methods. And it acknowledges that many in our farming communities have already been stepping up, that we need that support to step up and scale, while also being very real and giving clarity about what the limits to pollution, nitrates, and synthetic fertilizers need to be, so that we can all protect our water and our soils, again, the very living systems that long-term farming relies on. There's a ton of jobs in clean energy where we have to move, and the Greens have announced to triple the financial support to industry, as an example, as one of our points, to be able to move to clean energy. But also, and I had to check on this properly, clean energy, solar creates more jobs than any other forms of renewable energy, which is why we have put up a proposal, for example, to subsidise more households to be able to have solar energy, as well as all appropriate public housing to be able to benefit from solar energy, and that could include solar arrays as well. Our Thriving Oceans plan will also give that clarity, and we are already hearing from recreational fishers and even from commercial fishers, who again understand that we've got to give some clarity and planning to protect our fish stocks and our entire marine ecosystems, and moving away from the most harmful commercial fishing practices and supporting fishers towards sustainable fishing methods. Housing, Phil has already spoken about that as well, but all parts of housing, from the build itself to what we build with, to how we build and create communities and stop just plonking houses on pieces of land, to the absolutely vital insulation and upgrade that we need across our whole country. Massive opportunities for a modern economy in there as well. Public education. Okay, the Greens have come face to face with decades of underfunding in our public buildings, public school education and buildings, including a recent 2-day trip around the Taranaki Maunga and looking face to face at the underfunding of our public education system. Massive and ready opportunities just in that sector alone. Health, the same story. Transport, oh my goodness, that in itself, as we know, again, shares the mass of high carbon emissions along with our agricultural sector. So the Greens have always pushed for and have worked with Labour on transport being part of the economic solution also to climate and environmental protection. Our poverty action plan acknowledges that putting cash back into low-income households gets spent in local neighbourhoods and local communities immediately and acts as a local community stimulus. Phil's already mentioned the Jobs for Nature, which the Greens are really proud to champion, not just for providing good sustainable jobs and well-paid jobs for people, but will also help to do the job of reviving our much degraded life and economic ecosystems that again all of our economy rely on. Of course, in private sector, you've got massive opportunities for a unique green tourism, especially our local tourism, that has really come into play as an opportunity there, alongside our modern technology and innovation opportunities that are going to take us into the modern economy that we all need and all have to face with honesty and commitment. Kia ora, that'll do for now. Thank you.
Kia ora, Marama. That was a very robust answer, I could see. Todd and Phil just chomping at the bit to have more time. So what we're going to do is you all touch on a great talking point. It's almost like I pre-prepped the panel, job creation. So we're just going to talk about this quickly now. We had Stats New Zealand release some figures about 2 weeks ago, which said that 1 in 14 workers, or around 185,000 New Zealanders, expected to lose their job or business by mid-2021. So I would like the panel to all address, perhaps in a minute or so, what is the 1 or 2 key overt actions your government will take to create jobs? I will let Marama lead us off and set it all at the tone for a minute answer, and then we'll pass on to Phil and then Todd.
Oh, and I've probably overspent my time and will repeat and draw on some of the answers I had in my previous response, which was that we have for decades underspent in public infrastructure that the private sector also absolutely depends on for good trade and business. And so we have got massive opportunities just in the public sector alone, whether it's education, health, environmental protection, transport, clean energy, and the Greens have got plans to really support job spaces. And just finally, I'm really interested in hearing from business communities as well as to how we ensure we've got gender equity over the lens in our job creation. It is women who are carrying the massive burden of job losses, and I really want to address that as well with the business sector.
Thank you. Now off to Phil.
Thanks, Holly. Three points to make, really. I mentioned infrastructure before. The pipeline of infrastructure projects will play a huge part in the economic recovery for years to come. We currently have a $48 billion capital program of infrastructure that will generate a lot of jobs and a lot of demand in the economy, and that's really important that we maximise those jobs and build legacy infrastructure for future generations. The next point I wanted to make really is about government procurement. As Economic Development Minister, I recently took through Cabinet changes to the procurement rules that ask government agencies, when they are spending the $42 billion a year that the taxpayer spends buying goods and services, that they consider, that government agencies consider prioritising job opportunities for people who have been displaced by the COVID economic shock, and in particular to look at how they can deliver opportunities to groups who are disadvantaged currently in the labour market. And I think that's really important. The third point and final point on this I'd make is that ultimately we have to create an environment for business that attracts investment and provides a sustainable environment for businesses to thrive in, because it's the private sector that will generate most of the jobs that we rely on for our security and for our prosperity. And one of the most important things we can do is build a strong export economy that generates secure, well-paid, skilled jobs. And so our industry transformation policy, which is working with both the agri-tech industry, with the digital sector, and with advanced manufacturing, these are three examples of industries where we have the potential to grow clusters of large New Zealand firms that can achieve high productivity and generate the exports that we need. And all of them are job rich. And that's the future.
And to round us out on job creation, Todd.
Yeah, thanks very much. Look, I think we should start by saying every single government that's ever been in New Zealand has always said we are an export economy, and so we need to be out on the world market, you know, exporting as much as we can. So it doesn't matter who forms the next government, you've got to take that as a given. It's not some panacea that fixes things quickly. Holly, when we were in government, we were creating 100,000 jobs a year, 10,000 every month. That's what the Labor government inherited. And if we go back to before COVID, it had become anemic. Some months 2,000 jobs only were being created. In fact, there were months when we were at a standstill. So the Labor government, with the Greens' ability to create jobs before COVID, I think has the business community still guessing. We face huge challenge. 100,000 Kiwis are going to lose their job over the next 2 years on top of the 80,000 that already have. And when it comes to the idea that infrastructure will create those jobs, Phil is absolutely right, but you actually have to build the projects and you have to plan for them. You can't just have a working group to talk about them. Very clearly, National's plan is that we realise at a time when businesses are facing huge costs, having done what they were asked to get through the lockdown, we're going to focus on reducing regulatory burden, stimulating investment through greater depreciation and actual infrastructure, $31 billion of new infrastructure on top of what the government has already said they will spend. We've also announced a Job Start policy which gives $10,000 to small businesses and others to employ people to take on that little bit of risk at a time when the government is sending signals that they're not going to support business. We've actually said we've got their back. And the final thing is we will have a very big debate and actually won't overburden business with unnecessary increases to the minimum wage when people are losing their jobs, extra sick leave at a time when it's very hard to take sick leave if you've been made unemployed, and 100,000 Kiwis will, and we certainly won't be going ahead with Phil's 70s style industrial relations. Now is not the time to do that. Now is the time to lighten the load on New Zealand business so they, with the government, can create jobs, but a talk fest just won't do it.
Kia ora. When we get to the Q&A section, I'll definitely let all of the panel members address one another's points that they've thrown at each other throughout the kōrero. So before we get to that section, I just want to cover off our last topic, which is major events, which is another part of the economic development portfolio. And that is where the government gets involved in the event sector by identifying, funding and leveraging events that are internationally significant. At the beginning of this year, 2021 for Auckland was seen as one of the years that was going to be in the global spotlight, with 5 international events prompting billions of dollars of redevelopment and tens of thousands of visitors to our shores. Obviously, COVID-19 has changed all this, but panel members, Bearing in mind that you may not necessarily have a major events policy, I am very interested to know what you guys think that our plan should be for major events going forward. Do we continue to shut up shop, or should we get strategic with major events, leveraging our low rates of COVID and attract offshore spending? I will hand this over to Todd to answer first, then Marama, and then Phil to round us out before we go on to Q&A.
Well, look, this will sound a bit like a record, but unless we get the border policy sorted out quickly, any international event we want to host in New Zealand is going to be quite challenging. If New Zealanders don't have confidence that the government can secure the border and then focus on the things that are safe, then it's going to be so very many years. Our policy announced yesterday by Jerry Brownlee actually gets us there much more quickly, and it keeps New Zealanders safe. I want to draw attention to the National Convention Centre that under a national government, we invested time and effort and taxpayer money in to generate so that we can create those jobs and stand on our own 2 feet internationally. I mean, back then it was disappointing that Labor and others were opposed to it. I get that you oppose things when you are in opposition, but that sends the wrong signal to the business community about actually what it is we need to do to support them so they can help grow the economy. But we also had the Major Events Fund that supported a lot of events that were outward looking and that would give New Zealand profile and bring others here. We need to do that again. But to tell you, Holly, one of the things that does concern me, if you look in the Tourism Fund, $50 million has been set aside for supporting events. Much of that has been directed to our councils around the country. I'm not sure with all that's going on, our councils are the best people to work out what it is the private sector wants when it comes to stimulating the economy through major events. I'd actually like to see that money taken back and the business community have the opportunity to bid in for it, to come up with ideas that are going to be innovative and interesting and exciting that Kiwis and others will want to do. Wait for our economic development and tourism policy to come. There are some great ideas in there where we actually back business and the community to do the things that the government is trying to. Lots of things the government is not good at.
Thank you, Todd. Now, Marama.
Yeah, we don't have a specific sort of government involvement in specific events type of policy, but I was just thinking, I too am sad at the loss of many events, not just international attraction events, like the Matariki in Aotearoa that we have, the big sort of every 2-year cultural kapahaka festival that we has been incredible for international tourists. My son goes to a school in Manurewa and the Auckland Polynesian Festival got cancelled. Again, another incredible attraction, including for tourists. And I am really sad. It is the virus, it is COVID that has changed the way that we have had to live and accept the cancellation of such events. I do agree with Todd, and I think Phil is the same. I'm not keen to open our borders up unless we are absolutely sure that it is safe. I keep thinking of what's happening overseas where the virus is not under control and how even more damaging that is, including for business and for trading and for communities. And that is the last thing that any of us want. So still prioritize a health first and safe borders approach. Share the sadness of the lost opportunities with the event cancellations, but look again to how we can create within New Zealand, within Aotearoa, supporting our own community revivals and events, and really it's an opportunity to think about what can we do at home with what we've got at home to stimulate us at home.
Kia ora, and now to top us off, Phil.
So there's no question that attracting international events here could play a really interesting and significant role in supporting the economic recovery and really spotlighting New Zealand's position now globally recognised as a kind of safe haven because of the success of our response as a country to COVID-19. When we look at there's a number of events that are currently coming down the track at us. One is America's Cup this summer, which we will see some of the fastest sailing yachts in the world fighting it out on the Waitemata Harbour. And I think that's something that everyone's looking forward to and something that our government has wholeheartedly backed. Unfortunately, some other major events have had to be postponed because of COVID-19. And so, for example, the women's cricket, which was due here in next year, has been pushed out to March 2022, but that'll be a fabulous Women's Cricket World Cup event. New Zealand and Australia won the FIFA World Cup for women. That is due to be staged in New Zealand and Australia in 2023. That will be the biggest international sporting event that New Zealand has ever hosted. It's a massive opportunity to get exposure to a huge global audience, and it'll be a wonderful event that will, without doubt, will unite the country behind it. Also in 2022, the Women's Rugby World Cup. So this is a fabulous series of big global events where New Zealand competes with some of the best in the world, that as our borders open up progressively, we can look forward to them really being a celebration of that. The border is critically important, and Todd, I'm sort of bemused by your suggestion that somehow the borders have been a mess and that National's going to ride in like some sort of white horse and fix it all up and manage the border effectively. I don't know if the audience saw Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize winning economist, the other day, quoted in the New Zealand Herald editorial, citing New Zealand's response to COVID-19 as one of the best, if not the best, in the world. Now, National's had half a dozen different positions on the border since COVID-19 came. First, you wanted an Australian-style loose lockdown. Then we had Judith Collins saying she was going to have a zero tolerance for the virus. I don't know which week it is when you're saying, on one week you're saying, we want to let people in the border, the next minute we want it to be tougher. Well, I think the facts speak for themselves. New Zealand has one of the lowest rates of COVID infection in the population, one of the lowest mortality rates, and our economy, if you look at all of the comparative OECD data, our economy is performing as well or better than almost any other country in the OECD in response to COVID-19. So I think those facts speak for themselves. I would also say that the international film industry that is strongly supported through the economic development portfolio sees New Zealand as a global safe haven. Amazon's filming of their Lord of the Rings television series, where they've committed to several seasons that will bring literally billions of dollars of investment and thousands of jobs to New Zealand, just through that one production alone. They are here because they believe that New Zealand is currently the best place in the world to make movies. That's because of the success of our government's management of the pandemic.
Can I just hop in there a couple of points there? The reason that the international film industry is willing to come to New Zealand, wants to, is because of the flexible industrial relations rules that the national government put in place and that you, Phil, campaigned against, but when got to government, realised if you made the changes, they wouldn't come. That's the first thing.
That's not what Amazon say now, or Disney, or any of the other international studios. They regard New Zealand as a global safe haven because of our management of COVID.
Thank goodness somebody does. Here's the problem you have, and when I talk about the border, actually, New Zealanders deserve to have confidence. And when your government says that everybody is getting a test on day 3, they should. When they say that the people that are driving them in the buses from the airport to the COVID hotels are wearing PPE, they should have, and we know that's not the case. But here's the harm that the Auckland business community knows has happened. When that virus got back in the country, and last week the Prime Minister said, yes, it did get back in the country, 450 people a day lost their jobs. So, it sounds good, it feels good to be talking a little bit about, where the various policies are and how they change. What the New Zealand business community deserves is actually some honesty. And every time somebody's got out of a lockdown situation, and some of them have had COVID, it's through sheer good luck that it hasn't spread more widely. We can't afford to keep yo-yoing in and out of a lockdown situation because the economic harm is just far, far too great.
I don't think the public or the business community align with anything that you just said, Todd. Did you see the recent poll that came out that said that the business community rates the Labor-led government to manage the economic recovery to COVID with a 20-point lead over National? So
well,
something doesn't square there, Todd.
The other thing that I saw, which is probably much more important than a poll, is 80,000 New Zealanders have lost their jobs. Another 100,000 New Zealanders are to lose their jobs. And actually, what is needed is a clear plan. So yes, the border is important. It needs to be opened quickly as soon as it can. But here's a really good example of where we need to move away from essential, or what the government thinks is a good idea, to actually what is safe. So you've talked, Phil, about events coming to New Zealand and how we miss out and how difficult it is. There was $100,000 worth of economic stimulus available to New Zealand through the Rugby Championship that was lost to Australia. And it was lost to Australia, it seems, because of an inflexibility to find rules around quarantine. Some weeks later, when the Prime Minister realised how serious it was, changes were made for the Bledisloe Cup to come here. Now, actually, every New Zealander wants to be safe because they've sacrificed and they won't want to go back into a lockdown. But that $100,000 worth of economic activity to stimulate our economy that was lost to Australia, it appears, is because of the desire not to be flexible and find solutions. And that's what the New Zealand economy needs today and the years ahead, is solutions to some of the challenges, not just continually to look to restrict.
Well, we could debate it some more, but Holly, I suspect you want to move on, and the
Well,
audience probably does too.
If you don't mind, Holly, I was going to let the boys just keep going to town, but I thought I might jump in.
One about the rugby, though, because you could.
I thought I might just jump in with some comments. I'm not wanting to get in between a tussle, but I do think there are some important notes from both of them to pick up on. Firstly, about how are we going to keep our communities safe and well, looking after each other? How are we going to support our businesses and our investments? And again, for me, that comes to the long-term sustainable thinking that I know business leadership is already showing. And I really want to pull us away from this thinking that it is businesses by and large who want to ignore the realities of the challenges that are coming ahead of us, which is where I feel Todd McClay is sitting, that actually it is the business entrepreneurship, innovation and strategizing that has already shown they are up to the task of meeting those challenges head on, that the jobs is not just about however many people are employed or underemployed, that it's the quality of the jobs and whether they are going to take us forward into an economy that can rise to meet the challenges that I laid out at the beginning of my introduction. And that is where I don't think that Todd is giving the business community enough credit. That thinking has come through many conversations, many surveys, as Phil actually outlined, that they are up for the challenge. We do have to provide certainty and clarity as well as support. And that is the conversation that I want to keep having with people and members of the business community.
So we now move to what is arguably, but I mean, that was great. I was going to say what is arguably my favorite part of all of these sessions, which is our Q&A with our people listening. And they haven't been shy. They've sent through a lot of questions. I think this is a great one. It's from an anonymous attendee, which is the economy as a reference to a global market past its use by date as rhetoric and metric. Now, it's not to anyone in particular, but I'd be interested to hear take it away.
I've got a taker. Oh, I bet we'll all have a go at that one. Yes, in short, yes. For far too long, the economy as this sacred orb has been treated as if it is a thing in and of itself. Really, the economy is how we look after our people, how we look after our planet and our living systems, how we enable each other to trade and to live in communities, how we use our living systems to consume and survive on this planet. And for far too long, we have treated the word economy as if it is a thing that exists in and of itself, that it's this precious orb that exists up on this pedestal that must not fall down. But what that has meant is we have undermined the contributions of people, of environmental protection, and it has brought us to the climate crisis that we are all going to have to face together in some way. So yes, I think it's past its use by date. This is why actually this government, and I acknowledge our co-founding leader, Jeanette Fitzsimons, who have brought into budget planning, for example, broader well-being indicators that focusing on things just, for example, like narrow budgets, GDP to spending ratio and so forth, have ended up showing in a deficit elsewhere. That for decades, while we have celebrated and prioritized small debts and small spend, that has actually shown up as a deficit in public health. It has shown up in a deficit in shitty buildings and schools. It has shown up as a deficit in personal debt and households carrying that debt and the intergenerational entrenched poverty. So we can no longer focus on such narrow definitions of how we live in this world and how we relate to each other and the living systems that we rely on for economic trade and investment. So yes, it is long past its use by date.
Well, I'm going to interpret the question slightly differently. As the economy as a reference to a global market past its use by date. I think the answer to that is that actually New Zealand's role in the global economy is more important than ever in the post-COVID era. You know, we for a long time, New Zealand has been recognised internationally as having some of the best macroeconomic policy settings, and our institutions and our policy settings are widely regarded as being among the best in the world, but we have consistently failed to deliver productivity increases in the economy that would satisfy New Zealanders' desire for a prosperous and modern economy. We have persisted with volume instead of value. We're stuck in a low wage rut that I think the National Party is committed to keeping us in. They, at every turn, while they say they want to raise wages, they do everything they can to suppress wages and the conditions that New Zealand workers operate under. We have to break out of that, and I believe that the way to do it is for us to choose the industries where we believe we have a competitive advantage and really invest in them and drive regulatory change, deliver infrastructure, workforce development, access to capital, access to technology, and do the things that we need to do to ensure that those sectors can grow large-scale New Zealand firms that can export. And it's something that your Singapores, your Israels, your Netherlands, your Norways, your Denmarks have done so well over the last 30 years. We've failed to do it. And it's the big productivity challenge that we have to do. And we'll only ever reap the benefits of that if we grow a strong export economy. And so that is more important than ever that we do that.
Well, Holly, the answer is no, it's not past its use by date. The economy is mum and dad that live down the road from us in the same neighbourhood who get up every morning and go and run a small business and employ a couple of people in the community. They work hard, they pay their bills and their staff first, and then they go and they raise their children and educate them from those proceeds and those profits. They're the people that our economy needs to work so very hard for. They're the ones that the most burden has been placed upon, not just as a result of the debt that they've incurred during COVID, but long before that. They're the ones that actually, when it comes to holidays, need a regulatory holiday, because the only way that we become more productive in New Zealand is to lighten the load of the burden that's placed upon those businesses, in particular those small businesses, so they can do the things we need them to. Phil interestingly said the government should pick the winners. Well, you are right, Phil, that the government can't spend money on everything. But I'm really, really cautious about the government deciding to pick winners, because what we've certainly seen over the...
What about your support for the tech sector yesterday, Todd? Is that picking winners?
No, you can have a go in a minute if you want to. Because,
well, it's a contradiction in what you're saying.
No, okay. So it's
Are you
really
picking winners with
because when you decide to pick winners, Phil. The problem with that is actually you're not engaging with the business community enough. And if you were engaging with them enough, you would know that actually where they need the help is more than just saying we'll have an export economy one day. So you are right. So we need more investment and we need to back New Zealanders more. The tax cut that we said that we announced just at the end of last week allows New Zealanders to make decisions for themselves what they want to spend money on that will have a direct stimulatory effect upon the economy and particularly small businesses. The other, the comparison is your government has said that you too will borrow some money, but actually the government will decide where to spend that up to $5 billion that may have some effect upon the economy, but some distance in the future. Very, very clearly, and I come back to this again, what the business community in New Zealand needs is a lighter load when it comes to the burden that's placed upon them from regulation. That's actually how you help them to be productive. We need to start comparing ourselves to the best in the world, not the countries that are the worst in the world. And through that, as they become more productive, those jobs that you are talking about that need to pay more and be better jobs are created. Over the next 2 years, it's going to be very hard for the 100,000 people that are going to lose their jobs actually to get ahead, let alone worry about the type of wage that they would have if they were working.
I'm just cognizant of the time. We've got 9 more minutes until we're going to wrap up this session, and we have got a lot of questions to get through. So I'll try to rattle off a couple really, really quickly. One of them is in regards to procurement, and the question says, will your government prioritise using local versus international providers or vendors as part of the recovery plan and commit to environmental goals and procurement policy of government?
Yes and yes. Our trade agreements prevent us from specifying that government procurement only sources particular products or products from particular firms or firms of particular countries. But there are ways, and we are already doing that, to ensure that New Zealand firms and small businesses, for example, and Māori and Pacific businesses can get better access to and are more competitive at winning government contracts. So there is a lot we can do through government procurement to deliver strong environmental and social and business development outcomes in New Zealand.
So the answer to that is also yes, although we need to do it in such a way as the New Zealand businesses are more competitive and therefore are able to get contracts with New Zealand more easily, but also actually have the opportunity to look and bid into contracts for procurement around the world. One area that I'm very keen to focus on is around standards. We need to make sure that when foreign businesses are bidding for contracts in New Zealand, they meet the same standards that are required of New Zealand businesses. I think there are examples where that may not have happened as well as it needs to, just as we expect New Zealand businesses to meet the standards when they export overseas. Where people can shop locally, they should, but at the same time, we are an export nation and we need to make sure the playing field is level, that businesses in New Zealand are not held back from doing well in overseas markets because of disadvantages, cost structures here, and that we keep the door open for them to international markets so they too can bid for contracts and procurement there.
I don't think a lot of the country understand just how important this issue of procurement actually is. I really appreciate that question and us having a discussion about it. I mean, I think about in the last national-led government how large contracts and procurement were taken out for services like Ministry of Social Development, which overrode local, long-standing communities, smaller organisations who had been delivering, say, family violence or job training services, knew their people were delivering good services, but the procurement that was put in place at that time really undercut that expertise and the long, well-evidenced positive impact that those smaller and local organisations were having. So I do absolutely support some proactive procurement policy, particularly around supporting the incredible entrepreneurial and investment spirit, including for Māori and Pacific women in particular. For example, we have a lot more potential left to go in fibre production and the fibre industry, including things like harakeke, which is flax for those who don't know, And it is Māori women who are leading the innovation and the charge, and had to go offshore for research funding. This was in the last government again, for research and development funding to try and get some local community collaborative enterprise going around their long-held traditional knowledge of producing flax. I'm in my bedroom. There it is. The black thing sitting on the top of my drawer was made by a Māori woman who cannot get the technology. I'm on my bed. The technology and the support to produce that fibre. We could be doing so much more of that, and I would love to see us heading to prioritise social, environmental, and local outcomes.
Kia ora. Okay, I'm going to do one more question, and it's from Johnny, who is one of the founders of Trans-Tasman Business Circle. And it's probably a pretty difficult question for all of our panelists to answer, because it means that you have to foreshadow what your cabinet might do. But I thought, great, let's put it out on the table. Johnny wants to know, what is the biggest announcement of significant impact you will make in the first week after the election?
All right, I'll go first.
Go.
Hi, Johnny. Dania says hi, by the way. That's a very interesting question, because if we were to announce it now on the Business Circle webinar, it certainly won't get announced in the first week after the election. Needless to say, it would be very career limiting to announce anything significant at this point. That was being saved for after the election. But look, if Labor is fortunate enough to be re-elected to government in this election, you can expect to see from us a very concerted program of reform across a number of spheres. We'll continue to build on the platform that we've built around environmental reform, around climate change, around modernising our welfare systems so that people who are the most vulnerable in our community can live with dignity and can access the things that they need in our economy. You'll see a continuation of the work to reform the RMA and fix our housing market. In economic development, you'll see the things we've been talking about today, particularly industry transformation plans and a much more proactive use of the $42 billion a year of government procurement to drive other outcomes.
I need to unmute. So the first week, we would be very proud to announce we've introduced legislation to repeal the RMA and instead replace it with two pieces of legislation that will protect the environment, but will enable business and industry and mums and dads to actually get on and develop and invest and to help grow the economy. The second thing is we will have introduced a bill to Parliament to reduce the regulatory burden that's placed upon small businesses so that they can get on and grow their businesses and can employ people. We'll be looking to stimulate investment by introducing the raft of changes to the tax system so that there is relief when it comes to depreciation, so that businesses listening to today can actually get on and invest in plant and material to grow the economy and create jobs. And finally, we won't be announcing any working groups. We're just going to get on with our $31 billion worth of investment in infrastructure and start building some of the roads that Phil cancelled when he became Transport Minister.
But Todd, how are you going to pay for it? There's $8 billion missing from your economic plan that you can't explain where you're going to find it. You've promised $31 billion of roads on top of the government's existing $48 billion program, and you've got no way to fund it.
So
you're going to have to explain that.
I'm going to do it now. I'm a little bit surprised it's taking you an hour to get around to that. I thought you would leave with that one. Couple of things. So so there was a small error that we have now fixed, number one. But I tell you
$4 billion is small.
I tell you what's much more important to people. The more than $200 billion that's going to be borrowed by your government and the taxes that will have to be increased to pay those back. The 100,000 people that are about to lose their jobs, we haven't got a plan, and some of the ill-disciplined spending that we've seen in economic development and regional economic development from money that's borrowed that Hardwick and Kiwis will have to pay back. We can sit here and smile about a very small error, but I tell you what Kiwis need is a plan to create jobs.
$8 billion is missing from your plan. That's not small.
Create jobs and stimulate the economy, and I don't think anybody is actually thinking that the direction that you're going on is anything more than a sideshow.
$8 billion, Todd. I think people want to know where you're going to find it.
Not $8 billion, but thanks for the question. It gives me the opportunity to talk much
Oh,
more.
come on, boys. Let me have
burden
my
that you're
turn now. Let me
placing
have my turn.
upon businesses.
Good show, good show. Look, I probably, and listening to Phil's ending, can say, yes, we completely agree with all of that and more, and we'll go further and faster on each of those points. We want to make sure that we do hand our grandchildren a stable planet, thriving living systems and natural world, and making sure that we are taking good care of each other. That is the only way that we are going to create a healthy, thriving communities that are connected, that is sustainable and long-term thinking. That is key to having a value, a higher value reputation that New Zealand has always prided itself on, that puts us apart, sets us apart from the rest of the world. And I just thought I'd finish by asking, because I am genuinely interested. I'm old, I'm a nana, I've got a grandchild. But for people out there who maybe have got children who are coming into reproductive age, I am wondering if your children are starting to talk about whether or not they have hope for even having their own children, whether or not they think we are making the right decisions right now to even think about bringing more children into this world. And I do want to offer hope to all of your children as well as mine. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Marama. That brings us to the end of the panel, everyone. I just wanted to mihi to you all, to Phil, Todd, Marama. I'm extremely impressed, as per usual, the way that we can conduct ourselves with respect and traverse very, very heated topics. So ngā mihi kia koutou, thank you so much. I'm now going to hand over to Dora, who's going to close out the session. And to those of you who we didn't get to your pātai, I'm sorry, but we will try to cover them off.
Thank you, Holly. My name is Dora Bera, and I am the Insights and Marketing Manager at the Trans-Tasman Business Circle. Before I formally thank our panel, you will now see our business sentiment poll pop up in front of you. If you don't mind filling that out, I'll share the results with you shortly. Thank you so much to our amazing New Zealand Economic Development panel featuring the Honourable Phil Twyford, the Honourable Todd McClay, and Marama Davidson. Thank you for sharing your insights with us today. It has been great hearing more about your party's economic growth plan, how your policies will focus on our long-term economic recovery, and the opportunities you see coming out of the COVID-19 crisis. It has been a great opportunity to hear from you all ahead of the election. Finally, thank you so much, Holly, for your excellent moderation of today's event, and thank you so much for your ongoing support with the Circle. You will now see our poll results pop up in front of you. 67% are still feeling challenged as a business person. 67% are feeling the government is doing a good job during this crisis. 100% believe it's 12 months until this crisis is over. And then we've got 67 believe that the Trans-Tasman bubble will be an advantage to their business, and 100% have agreed that this event has met their objectives. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your work week.